You're in the hands of an adolescent.
It's mystery. I don't like mysteries. Your bellyache. I gotta kill you right now.
Aye, sir.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Warp Core Podcast. This is UrzaMaster. Joining me as always, Lord Uther and Fert Derby. We are on our continuing mission through Star Trek The Original Series, Season 2. Today we're talking Wolf in the Fold. Not to be confused with Bull in the Heather, which I am really hoping I don't do. But Wolf in the Fold, another entry into the series that focuses heavily on Montgomery Scott. And I won't take any more time away from Fert Derby here because I'm sure he's got a lot to bring to the table. Fert Derby, give us some background on this great episode.
Thank you, UrzaMaster. Thank you, Lord Uther. And thanks, Trekkies, for jamming with us here on Season 2 of Star Trek. Now, this episode may have been an early Christmas present as it debuted on December 22nd, 1967. But after you watch it, you kind of scratch your head and said, this should have been the Halloween episode in mid to late October that we were promised. Returning champion director Joseph Pevney is back behind the camera. And the writer is Robert Bloch. Now, Robert, as we've discussed previously on the Warp Core, make sure you're subscribing and checking it out. He was that influential novelist, short story writer, television writer Roddenberry had helped recruit in Season 1. And he was always trying to do the ideal horror episode. That he liked science fiction, he liked horror. It's the two great tastes that go great together in his mind. So in the first season, he gave us What Are Little Girls Made Of?, which we discussed extensively in Warp Core episode number 32. Again, it's right there in the archives. Just click. And that was the one, of course, where Kirk and Chapel ended up coming across Chapel's ex, who was trying to mass distribute a whole new line of identical android replicants deep in an underground cavern, and were plotting to overthrow the Federation and all known space. And that one had a few moments. It had a couple of goofy moments too, some oddly shaped stalagmites that you can clearly see in our Warp Core 32 little tile there. I won't go further. But he did that one, and it was kind of a mixed bag. There were some moments that were unsettling, but it never quite got the full effect. He tried again with his second episode in Season 2 now, which we discussed in Warp Core 47. And please, Warp Core fans, Warp Core fanatics, casual Star Trek viewers, please go to the archive and watch episode 47 of the Warp Core to hear Lord Uther and UrzaMaster's and mine epic takedown of Robert Bloch's second effort, Cat's Paw. And there he was just throwing the whole kitchen sink at you. We had Macbeth-style witches. We had giant black cats. We had ground fog around the ankles. We had, all that was missing was like Snoopy, at a typewriter. It was a dark and stormy night. Like that one was so trying to be. In fact, the characters themselves, as you recall, kept saying like, this is just like a horror picture or a spooky story or Halloween. It was very meta and self-referential. And as a horror movie fan growing up over the years, I appreciated where they were trying to do, but as we discussed in our analysis of Cat's Paw, the effects and overall tenor of the episode really worked against that suspense ominousness that Bloch was going for. But friends, I'm here to tell you, the third time is the charm, because at long last, Robert Bloch has nailed the formula between giving us scary and suspenseful without teetering over into silly And this is genuinely I imagine it reminds me of the Buck Rogers in the 25th century episode Space Vampires, in which, whether by accident or design, the producers managed to extract some really creepy moments for network television, things that would genuinely unsettle a 7, 8, or 9-year-old that was watching this unsuspectedly just 3 days before Christmas. Talk about unwrapping a beautifully wrapped present and then discovering there are spiders in it and they're coming out and getting all over the carpet. This episode is the spiders in the Christmas present box. And Robert Bloch, this is his final episode, I believe, on the writing staff. And we wish him well for his service. It definitely was an up and down portfolio, resume that he left us. But he went out on a high note, friends, because Wolf in the Fold, for me, is the Halloween episode we deserved, even if they did it, during Advent season. And we had ground fog, once again. I don't know if he actually writes it in the script or the producer said, oh, it's a Bloch episode, somebody go get the fog machines. But, again, fog that just hangs around your ankles. It never gets to eye level. You never have to, worry about cutting through it like a shower curtain. But it works, right? In a very Hammer, Christopher Lee, Vincent Price kind of old, there's something evil out on the moors. It just, for a certain generation and a certain fandom that likes scary movies, it just feels like warm and fuzzy. Like, oh, look, it's ground fog. Something bad is about to happen. And it does, because we have Scotty and McCoy and Kirk on shore leave, taking in a belly dancer themed nightclub where you don't applaud, you just flick your table lamps, so forth. So that must be hell on the power bills. But you have the three males, sans Spock, casually leering at the exotic dancers that are moving through the audience and on stage. And, we even get Kirk, kind of with that sly, grin on his face, you like it, Scotty? Aye. And it's just, I mean, it's for crew bonding and morale and stress relieving, it works. It just lands, maybe slightly 10% different in this era than it probably did on December 22nd, 1967. We find out, if we didn't know already, that Scotty has that Aberdeen background, and that's where he's from. And he takes a Bonnie Lass out for a night stroll after the performance. And then it's a great moment with Kirk and McCoy where Kirk's like, say, I know this place. And then McCoy interrupts him with an even bigger southern grin. Oh, yes, I know that place. Let's go. But of course, if this was just an episode about a bad pub crawl in a sort of misty planet, then obviously we wouldn't get very far. But instead, we have a murder most foul. And there's a dead Bonnie Lass on the ground with Scotty leaning against a wall, blood on his hands, blood on a knife that he's holding, and he can't remember a thing. And from that, gentlemen, we have a jumping off point for, as I say, an episode that if you pitched it out loud, you might get slapped by most studio executives or on the lots. I would love to have heard Gene Roddenberry's initial reaction to basically the plot of this episode, which is, what if Jack the Ripper was actually an alien being and he took over the Enterprise? Like, that's, again, it's just so, your mind is blown by the audacity of it. And then, thanks to the steady hand of Joe Pevney and Bloch scripting, darned if they don't pull it off. Because this very, very quickly could have turned into The Apple or Cat's Paw or any of the others wobbles that season 2 has been able to deliver. But they went on a high wire act They walked the distance between two skyscrapers in a slightly blustery day, and basically no missteps, gentlemen. And you wouldn't have that without strong performances from the cast, particularly James Doohan, who again gets to be forward and center, but here vulnerable and uncertain, and he nails it. Like, as growing up as a fan of the feature film franchise, they never gave Scotty any real utility in terms of the storylines where it was a Montgomery Scott subplot. He was always part of the main action. He was always a doer, but they never gave him an opportunity in the big screen. Again, you only have 2 hours, and you paid to see DeForest Kelley, Nimoy, and Shatner, so that's where you were going to go. But they very rarely gave him an opportunity to be anything more than your chief engineer who is a miracle worker. So it's always great to see something where we get to see Scott, right? We get to see him, be the main character in this story as opposed to just a supporting cog. We get 3, either he or she, depending on the victim. They're dead, Jim. So McCoy gets to do that there. We get Kirk in his green tunic. We get a psycho tricorder, which I'm sure one of you two will reference here shortly. And like I say, Jack the Ripper, which has fascinated me, whether you're thinking of the Hughes brothers film From Hell, or Malcolm McDowell and David Warner chasing each other through modern-day San Francisco at the time in Time After Time, or even Rowdy Harrington, future director of Roadhouse, taking James Spader on a tour of Jack's Back. It's always just been like, right, the madman who lurks in the London fog and stabs women of the night and helpless victims, and did they catch him? Did they not catch him? Who was he? What drove him? He was the original Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees for his time. And when he finally, when we say that, oh my goodness, he was actually an alien being moving through planet to planet and system to system, and then he takes over the Enterprise systems, and he never represents more than a cackle and a voice. But it's creepy, right? It's creepy hearing the Enterprise computer saying, "You're all going to die." And then they leap on something late, and you almost wish they'd kind of done it sooner in the episode. But the ability to leap from body to body and take over its victims almost simultaneously. There was an underappreciated Denzel Washington horror movie from 1998 called Fallen, which had a serial killer who was able to do the same, able to jump from Donald Sutherland to James Gandolfini to any of the supporting cast. And so how do you fight something that won't die? And they could have run even further with that. It was kind of a late addition, a third act surprise that could have even been, if you'd introduced that right at the top or suggested it to the audience, you could have really played around with that. What if it had taken over like a McCoy, or Spock even? The idea, I get chills thinking of, Spock taken over by Jack the Ripper. Like, that would have been fantastic. So, gentlemen, what did you think of the horror episode that finally, in this viewer's humble opinion, found its mark, and we didn't have giant black cats threatening them with reverse projection and other tricks of the trade?
First of all, I want to tackle this metaphor of opening the present Christmas morning and a bunch of spiders leap out. Like, that's terrifying. But also hysterical. I love it. This episode really, Jack the Ripper in space, if you describe it that way, it sounds entirely silly and ridiculous and a completely bizarre approach to any kind of television episode. The execution was phenomenal. And this is the Scotty that I think they wanted to give us in Star Trek II, where the one actor that stayed at his post and ended up with Scotty in sickbay dead on the table was actually his son, a deleted scene. That would have entirely changed Scotty's performance there. And when you add that deleted scene in, man, does it add some depth to that character. It's amazing, and it's really too bad they cut that out. And this is kind of where that stems from. Some of these Scotty performances we've seen in season 2 make him into a rival of the big three almost. Like he's somehow elevating even the supporting cast around him to these bigger and greater roles that it's almost like, you know, we don't want to give him too much because then, you know, who's the central focus of the character, characterization in this show? Like, are we trying to make this a Scotty show? Is this a Kirk show? I mean, Kirk obviously it's Star Trek. It's Kirk, right? So when he gets these opportunities, to see him shine like this is fantastic. And it really highlights the fact that James Doohan was not just Scotty. He could really have played a whole myriad of characters. He just happened to fall in love with Montgomery Scott. I mean, even I think in, was it Starsky and Hutch, they run into James Doohan, and he's talking about, you know, bury me up, Kirk, and he's all drunk by this car, and they're like arresting him, and he's like, I got to get back to the Enterprise. It's, you know, later in life, but it's like, wow, this is like, he's so much more than that, and there was so much more to him even as Scotty, and we tend to forget that. That alone makes this episode a winner. On top of that, you get a brilliantly executed horror episode. I don't like horror. It's not my thing, but this, it wasn't too scary. Certainly for TV, you couldn't be too scary, but it was scary enough, suspenseful enough to where you really got something, I don't even know how to put it, something truly compelling. Like it was kept you invested and occupied and wondering what they were going to do next, because this thing just kept growing on them and kept getting weirder and stronger and harder to beat. And then, of course, you get that surprise third act, and it's like, wow. Like, if you think about this, and I think anytime we're watching a television show, you kind of always have that timer in your head, right? Of like, all right, I know I'm so many minutes in, eventually the good guys are going to win, right? You know, you've kind of, and in Star Trek, you figured out this formula that within the last few minutes, the good guys are going to pull it off somehow. This was probably the first, maybe only episode where it got to that last few minutes, and I was like, what are they going to do? Like, I know how it's going to go. So it's like, for me, it was just, it was thrilling. It was excellent writing. It really validated some of the earlier sort of foibles of this writer. You know, Catspaw, really, honestly, I think Catspaw was better than we give it credit for. It was just so ambitious, it ended up being silly.
Okay.
And that's what kind of defeated it, right? This episode was very ambitious, but it just happened to click. And I do think it's because it was a Scotty forward episode. I think he was the right vehicle to sort of deliver this kind of message of horror. And that really leapt into the, you know, the crises aboard the Enterprise, which, of course, it's going to be a crisis aboard the Enterprise if it's Scotty. You know, if anybody loves the Enterprise, it's not just Kirk. Scotty is like literally attached at the hip. You know, Kirk loves the Enterprise, but he loves it crew and all. Scotty just loves the Enterprise, which we will find out in a later upcoming episode. But this was really, I mean, this episode was a surprise, because this is not one that I think people talk about. I think the next episode, when we talk about that, it's going to be obvious why people talk about that one whenever they reference the original series. But the episode that directly precedes it really hits, I think, some of the foundational methods that inform later Star Trek episodes and other series that make those sort of Monster of the Week type episodes just truly exceptional and really worth your time not just like an X-Files where you can skip Smoking Man to Smoking Man episode.
I think it's another second episode in a row where they do a lot with a little. And what I mean by that is it could have gone off the rails and gone the way of the cat's paw. And like we all keep saying, somehow they pull it out. It's kind of a risque episode a little bit, too, because we got belly dancers in the beginning. And I was like, whoa, what's going on here? And it's 2024, and I'm saying that. And then just the whole, like, murder after murder after murder that's happening. And just the violence and not knowing who it is. So I felt like they took some risks here, but it all winds up, obviously paying off in the end. A couple things I found kind of interesting or funny is they're like, shut all the doors. And this guy must have had those switches built just for that occasion where he flipped all the switches and all the doors were closed. I mean, what are the chances of him actually having to employ that at some point in time? He was ready, though, just for that situation. And anytime, let's talk about another kind of risque thing. They're doing a seance. Like, they're all holding hands, doing a seance, almost around like a Ouija board type of thing. And that is something else, I think, for that time period that just might have put people on edge. Like, it was more of the mental aspect of being scared, or like I always tell Fert Derby, don't show me devil movies. They freak me out. And that's kind of what the seance thing does to people too, especially if you got that background of being a religious family at some point in time. Don't mess with spirits. Don't do that kind of stuff. And here they are holding hands trying to get that to happen. I also like the lights go off and the lights go back on and something has happened. So of course there was a murder when the lights had gone off at some point. We get the wonderful dramatic pause that I had mentioned in our last episode about Shatner did it a couple times, but he did this whole or something. Like, it was just the perfect, as we know, Shatner-esque kind of pause that he always has. And even as a kid, I knew who the bad guy was going to be in the long run, because anytime you have a guy who talks like this and says, oh, come on, guys, it can't be that. Oh, come on, guys, it must be this. Oh, you're making this up right now. You got to be crazy. Like, anytime you see that guy, and a guy that looks like that guy and talks like that guy, it's him. I don't care what year it is. That's going to be the killer. So a lot of things happen here. Again, do a lot with a little bit. Very solid episode. Very solid episode.
We would be remiss in not acknowledging the contributions of John Hedler, who did play Hengist, the law enforcement administrator, who does indeed make quite the impression. Also gets in one heck of a stunt kick on Kirk. That was actually a little bit of fight choreography. Generally speaking, we do like to gently tease the Star Trek fight coordinators for mid to late 60s stunts, but he leaves his feet and does like a Gymkhana kick right into Kirk's abdomen, or their doubles, and sends him careening to the floor, and then hits the ground like he never missed a step. So that was very good. A couple of things, gentlemen. Rapid fire. You can sound off if anything struck it with you. No Uhura this time. So I mean, I think there might have been something going on in Starfleet. I think there might have been a Federation flu, if you will, because I don't believe I saw her on the bridge. I love that Spock in the first part of the episode, because he doesn't go planet side and so forth. They've kind of got him on the Enterprise and so forth. But once the action shifts to the ship, he reasserts himself and becomes more and more part of the story, including having the ship's computer trying to compute to the last digit of pi. Again, it may seem like a cliche now in 2024, but at the time, I'm sure that was a novel way to try and gum up the works. Spock also delivers a line that has engendered some criticism in hindsight again, saying that females overall are easily frightened, and as opposed to the males of the species. And you can make of that what you will. I think it's a prevailing wisdom, perhaps, that was, decent for the late '60s. I don't know that the writers of Strange New World would keep that line if they were ever updating Wolf in the Fold. So that was a little something that, again, modern critics have taken a few shots at. But overall, it just kind of comes and goes. This was the stabbiest episode I believe we will see in our Warp Core, and so forth. And to Lord Uther's credit, I mean, even if you're not seeing blood, even if you're not seeing the knife plunge into the flesh, like, it's still, again, you're a child or a young person, or even an impressionable non-horror fan. I mean, that's going to get to you. The lights go out, in a very Agatha Christie way, and then suddenly there's someone on the ground, and there's Scotty again. And I think to pivot a little bit back to what UrzaMaster was telling us, what was great about Scotty was that, by all accounts, he looks guilty, right? He can't remember what's going on. He's got the murder weapon in at least two cases in his hand, in the proximity. I mean, he doesn't have motive necessarily, and we want to believe he's innocent. I don't think there's any point where diehard Trekkies are saying, "Oh, maybe he actually did it." We want the mystery unraveled, but the fact that he can't come up with a good explanation for what's there, and it looks like, as a frame job, it's a tight fit. And like I say, you want it unsolved, you want the mystery unraveled, and you want it solved and the knot untied, because you don't want Scotty to be railroaded. Well, we have no choice. I mean, look at what we have. Our own eyes tell us he's the killer. And I think James Doohan conveying that vulnerability is, like I say, something they don't ask him to do very often on the show. And I think this episode, that was the great repository where he was able to pour that there. So yes, and it also had the line, "That is very disquieting," and that was spoken by one of the administrators on the planet. And it's a completely artificial line from the man, I will remind you, wrote the book Psycho, which Alfred Hitchcock based Norman Bates and Mother on. But if you can make me believe someone saying that's very disquieting, I'm all there for you there. So thank you, Robert Bloch, for persisting and finally getting it right for us.
Absolutely. And I have to say, those first two Bloch episodes were disquieting. Hey. But this one, out of 7 warp cores, gentlemen, Fert Derby, how many warp cores are you giving it?
Well, again, I think we're being a little stingier with our highest marks here. It is hard to climb up Paramount Mountain, but I'm willing, because, like I say, for being so brash and audacious, and just let's shake things up. Let's truly put the language, the vocabulary, the atmosphere of a creepy Halloween-style horror thriller into the context of Gene Roddenberry's, Star Trek, To Boldly Go Where No One Has Gone Before. I'm going to go 6.5. I think that I don't think it can reach that 7 just quite yet. I think it's just beyond its grasp. But this is as satisfying, and when we talk at the end of this season about our favorite episodes, Wolf in the Fold will be resurrected for our viewers. And mark my words, Warp Core fans, make sure that you're looking at Warp Core 53 here, and you'll hear me say it, that this is one of my favorites of Season 2, in a season that has shown very high highs and a few low lows. This one is just tantalizingly away from the summit, so I'm going 6.5.
Yeah, I'm going to go 6, because I think that's a good point about I have to be careful with my sevens, I think. Great episode. Looking back on it, it's the classic, all the, fingers are pointing at that person, but we really know we know it's going to be someone else, because how could Scotty do something like that? I like the term stabby, by the way. He is not a stabby type of person. No. So again, I do also like what UrzaMaster. Well, you both kind of brought this up. Anytime I think we can go away from the big three and focus on someone else, I just feel like it elevates the show. We need to get to know those other people. It's one of those episodes where that starts happening, where we get to know these crew members. So I'm going to go 6 out of 7. Can't be a total 7 for me.
I agree. It's hard to hit that 7, or it should be harder. I'm going to go 6.5 though. My reasoning for that is I think the episode itself is a 6, but I think in context, what this episode does is it shows how much more successful Star Trek could be, given the space and time in an episode to acquaint us with other characters aside from the captain, the first officer, the chief medical officer. Although those are typically the focus of really all the Star Trek series, I don't think without an episode like this one, you probably don't get a lot of the Next Generation episodes or the Voyager episodes, and you definitely wouldn't get any Deep Space Nine. That, to me, makes this like a crux in the foundation of future Star Trek. And that, I think, gives it that half-point boost past a 6. Hats off to James Doohan, though. I mean, what a stunning performance in this episode. Like, if he didn't win an Emmy for this, he should have. Posthumously, they should send him one. Blasted off into space to find his ashes, because, my goodness, was that an excellent, excellent portrayal of somebody who had to believe themselves to be guilty because they literally could not remember what they had done. And if any of you have ever had too many beverages, like, that can happen. Hopefully you didn't stab anybody. Hopefully it's more like who knocked over the vase and broke it, and not something more serious. But that true remorse that plays out on his face, the hurt, the heartache, the confusion, you really don't see that in too many Star Trek episodes, certainly of the original series. They don't typically grab these heavy subjects as much. And honestly, I also give it the 6.5 because I think without this episode, the following episode may not be as successful. Because the following episode certainly revs us in another direction that I think this episode perfectly sets an audience up for. So with that, we journey forward to greater and greater expanses of that strange new universe we explore in Star Trek, the original series, and beyond. And we also say, live long and prosper.